In our last journey, we stepped into clay tablets and ancient scriptures. We traced echoes of Sumer, floods, gardens, and councils of gods that shaped the Bible itself, but that was only the beginning. Tonight, Part 2 unlocks a deeper vault. What if the Vatican's fear was never buried in dusty scrolls, but etched into cathedrals, hidden in royal myths, and whispered through forbidden lore? What if memory was never erased but disguised in plain sight? If Part 1 left you wondering what secrets the Vatican still guards, stay with me. And if these hidden echoes of history pull you in, tap like. It helps us keep digging deeper into the shadows. And so, Part 2 unfolds. Not just clay and scripture, but bloodlines, towers, and forbidden machines. To understand why the Vatican truly feared the Anunnaki, we must begin with the rulers, who claimed that their authority came not from men, but from the gods themselves. For countless generations, kings and rulers declared that their authority was not only a matter of politics, but a gift of the divine. In the cities of ancient Mesopotamia, inscriptions described kings as chosen by the gods, their blood carrying something that set them apart from ordinary men. Some texts even hint that rulers were descended from the Anunnaki themselves, bearing a spark of celestial essence within their veins. These claims were not whispered behind closed doors. They were etched into stone, sung in hymns, and honored in sacred rituals. To govern was more than ruling people. It was to embody the will of heaven on earth. This idea did not remain in Mesopotamia alone. Across dynasties and empires, the same belief appeared. Egyptian pharaohs called themselves sons of the gods. In Sumer, kings stood as intermediaries between humanity and the divine. Everywhere the message echoed. Rulers were not like common men. They were marked by a higher connection. If the Vatican were ever to acknowledge these ancient traditions as truth, it would suggest that the earliest leaders of humanity were not fully human. It would imply they were bound to something far older, far stranger, and the echoes of those bloodlines did not vanish with time. Across Europe, royal families guarded stories of descent from gods, giants, or angels. Medieval chroniclers wrote of monarchs tracing their ancestry back to Noah, and sometimes to beings even more mysterious who walked the earth before the flood. Symbols of this legacy often appeared in their regalia. Crowns shaped with horns or wings reflected images once tied to the Anunnaki. These were not mere decorations. They served as reminders, visible signs that kings walked between the human world and the divine realm. The Church, however, worked to shape the story differently. By teaching that authority came from God alone, it suppressed the older myths of rulers with mixed heritage. To allow such tales would mean admitting that divine bloodlines still flowed through human families. And if that were true, kings and priests might have been chosen not just by heaven, but by ancient memory of the Anunnaki. This possibility carried danger. It meant that the very existence of power could be seen as proof of a connection to forgotten gods. Some researchers argue that the doctrine of the divine right of kings was a mask, hiding a much older truth. In this perspective, kingship was not invented by men. It was bestowed. Ancient Sumerian lists even describe rulers reigning for lifespans that stretched for hundreds of years, far beyond human possibility. Such reigns hint at something more than ordinary men. To the ancients, these kings were not simply blessed. They were different in essence. Behind their crowns, the shadow of the Anunnaki remained. Legends of sacred ancestry did not remain bound to Mesopotamia. Across Europe, royal houses preserved myths claiming descent from gods, giants, and even angels. Chronicles from the Middle Ages described kings, tracing their lineage, not only to Noah, but to mysterious beings said to have lived before the Great Flood. In certain traditions, rulers wore crowns shaped like horns or wings, symbols echoing ancient ties to the Anunnaki. These designs were never random ornaments. They were visible declarations that monarchs claimed to stand between heaven and earth, carrying authority beyond the human realm. Yet, the Vatican worked carefully to control these stories. By promoting the belief that power flowed solely from God, it drowned out older traditions of mixed heritage. Accepting those tales would mean admitting that divine bloodlines still existed among men. And if that were true, then perhaps kings and priests carried more than religious titles. They carried memory, blood, and power tied to the Anunnaki. This notion cast a dangerous shadow over royal blood. It suggested that authority itself might be evidence of something ancient living on in humanity. Some researchers argue that the idea of divine right was simply a new name for an older truth. In this view, kingship was not created, it was inherited. It was a gift, passed down from an age when rulers were chosen not by men but by the gods. Ancient records from Sumer even describe kings whose reigns lasted centuries, far beyond natural human years. These strange timelines hint at leaders who were not ordinary mortals. For the ancients, such rulers were more than blessed, they were of a different nature. Behind every crown lay the shadow of the Anunnaki. But kingship was never only about blood, it was also about knowledge. Many traditions spoke of rulers as guardians of wisdom given by higher beings. Inscriptions tell of leaders who received the gifts of writing, law, and astronomy directly from the heavens. These kings were celebrated not only for strength, but for carrying fragments of divine understanding. Their role was to stand between mankind and the gods, not only in body but in mind. As time passed, echoes of this belief appeared across the ancient world. In Greece, kings claimed descent from Zeus. In Rome, emperors were honored as sons of the gods. Medieval monarchs repeated the pattern, tracing their lines to biblical figures or legendary ancestors. Beneath all these stories lay the same message: rulers were more than human. Their lineage connected them to the heavens. If such claims were true, it would mean that royal families represented humanity's last living link to the Anunnaki. For the Vatican, acknowledging this would undermine its claim as the sole mediator between heaven and earth. The myth of sacred bloodlines threatened more than royal prestige. It challenged the very foundation of the Church's authority. But ancestry was only one layer of memory. Echoes of the Anunnaki survived not only in families, but also in symbols carved into stone, painted on glass, and hidden in cathedrals. To see why the Vatican feared these echoes, we must step inside the sacred walls of Europe's churches and search for what was left behind. Inside cathedrals, holy art stretches across every surface. At first glance, it tells familiar Christian stories. But look closely, and unexpected shapes emerge. Serpents curl in quiet corners, winged beings spread their arms, and giants with strange faces peer down from stone. To the faithful, these may have seemed like decoration. To scholars, they are echoes of something far older. These forms resemble not only Christian imagery, but memories from Mesopotamia. Carvings of dragons, winged guardians, and hybrid creatures appear again and again. Some mirror the Abkalu of Sumer, part man, part fish, bringers of wisdom. Others recall the giants who once walked between worlds. Why would such figures appear in Christian temples? Were they warnings? Attempts to merge ancient myths with new faith, or subtle acknowledgements that the memory of the Anunnaki never fully disappeared? Stained glass windows, designed to instruct the faithful, also hold mysteries. Some figures hold strange tools, or stand beneath stars and suns. Others depict serpents not as enemies, but as guardians of light. To casual eyes, these were artistic choices, but a closer look reveals deeper layers, connecting back to Mesopotamian stories of wisdom and forbidden truth. Such images were not chosen at random. Artists worked under the guidance of church leaders, who decided what could be shown. Why then allow images with no clear biblical meaning? Perhaps these were traditions passed quietly from one generation of craftsmen to the next, or perhaps they were acts of quiet resistance, a way to preserve stories that official voices sought to erase. Each pane of glass held not just light, but questions that whispered of the Anunnaki. High on cathedral rooftops, gargoyles gazed down in silence. Officially, they were meant to protect against evil or serve as drains for rainwater. Yet their forms are strange. Giants, winged hybrids, figures that look far closer to Mesopotamian guardians than Christian saints. Their presence turns holy places into museums of forgotten myth. Pilgrims entering these cathedrals may not have noticed, but the builders chose those forms with care. Perhaps they carried memories older than Christianity itself. Even the layout of cathedrals holds hidden meaning. Floors shaped like labyrinths, ceilings painted with stars, doors carved with suns and moons. All echo ancient designs. Some labyrinths recall Mesopotamian maps of the underworld. Some ceilings mirror Sumerian star charts. Numbers, too, were arranged with care. Columns, steps, and windows often followed symbolic patterns. In Christian teaching, they symbolized holiness. In older traditions, they held power tied to gods. of planets and time itself. To see them in cathedrals suggests the builders remembered more than one faith. The stones, windows, and patterns tell two stories at once. One is the open story of Christianity, the other is hidden, a quiet survival of older memory. Serpents, giants, winged beings, labyrinths, stars, all woven into sacred architecture. Were they mistakes, coincidences, or deliberate whispers left for those who knew how to read them? The Vatican rarely explains why so many pre-Christian symbols appear in its most sacred spaces. Silence is easier than acknowledgement. But the evidence remains carved in stone. Cathedrals point not only upward to heaven, but backward, toward Mesopotamia. From these walls, our path leads to towers. Towers that once reached toward the sky, where language broke and unity was scattered. The story of the Tower of Babel, and its shadow of the Anunnaki. The Tower of Babel is among the Bible's most famous tales. It speaks of a time when all humanity spoke one language and worked together to build a tower reaching into the heavens. But the Lord, angered by their ambition, scattered them and confused their tongues. Many read it as a lesson in humility. But in Mesopotamia, similar stories existed long before Genesis. They told of towers, gods, and the shattering of human unity. The Sumerians spoke of ziggurats, massive step temples that stretched high into the sky. These were not just monuments, but bridges between the mortal and divine. Priests climbed them to offer rituals to the gods. Could the Tower of Babel be a memory of these structures, a retelling of humanity's attempt to reach the heavens, reshaped into a biblical warning? If so, then the roots of Babel are far older than the Bible itself. Archaeologists have uncovered ruins of ziggurats in cities such as Ur and Babylon. Their size and design were astonishing, towering above the plains, symbols of kings who claimed the power to touch the divine. One temple was even called the foundation of heaven and earth. The Tower of Babel may not have been one tower at all, but the memory of many ziggurats rising across Mesopotamia. Over time, Hebrew tradition reshaped this memory into a cautionary tale. Instead of monuments of divine connection, they became warnings against pride. The story was not created from nothing. It was transformed, and within its shadow lingers not only the voice of God, but the distant echo of the Anunnaki. Language itself becomes part of the mystery. In Genesis, God scatters the people by giving them many tongues. Yet, Mesopotamian myths tell of a time when all humans spoke one speech, a language taught by divine teachers. The Abkalu were said to have given mankind writing and language itself. Could the confusion at Babel be the undoing of this gift, a deliberate breaking of unity? If so, the Tower of Babel was not only about arrogance, it was about memory. It carried the echo of a time when gods and humans walked side by side, when language was a bridge, not a wall. By scattering speech, the gods ensured that unity and the knowledge that came with it would be lost. Some scholars even suggest that Babel's destruction was less a punishment and more a protection. In Mesopotamian tales, when mankind drew too close to the divine, the gods struck them down, fearing their ambition, fire, flood, or confusion. These were tools to restrain humanity. The story of Babel fits this older pattern. Knowledge was too dangerous, unity too strong. To scatter humanity was to keep their power in check. The Vatican rarely addresses how closely this story mirrors older myths. For if Babel was about forbidden knowledge, then it points directly back to the Anunnaki and their fear of human potential. The tower was more than a symbol of arrogance. It was the dividing line between what humans once knew and what was taken away. Even now, questions linger. What knowledge was lost when humanity was scattered? What secrets did the Anunnaki once share that were silenced by fear? To answer, we must follow the trail into the next shadow, the forbidden sciences, the fallen knowledge, and the wisdom that the Vatican worked so hard to conceal. In Mesopotamian tales, the Abkalu descended from the heavens to teach humanity. They gave writing, agriculture, and architecture. At first, they were celebrated as bringers of gifts, but with time they came to be seen as dangerous, their wisdom too great, their lessons too bold. What began as a blessing was rebranded as a warning. Humanity was told that not all knowledge was safe. The Bible echoes this shift. In Eden, the serpent offered knowledge, but it led to exile. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers revealed forbidden arts, and their children became giants. Again and again, wisdom is portrayed as both light and shadow. The Vatican repeated this lesson. Forbidden knowledge leads away from God. But the deeper question remains: who decided what truths were forbidden, and why? If the Anunnaki once shared wisdom freely, then silencing it was not only censorship, it was the erasure of memory. Among their gifts was knowledge of the heavens. Mesopotamian priests charted the stars with breathtaking precision. They recorded eclipses, mapped planets, and measured time with astonishing accuracy. Many believed such knowledge came not from men, but from divine teachers. To look at the night sky was to read the handwriting of the gods. Later traditions, however, cast suspicion over such practices. Astrology was forbidden, while astronomy was permitted. A careful line was drawn between science and superstition. The Vatican inherited this struggle. For centuries it allowed certain studies while silencing others. Knowledge of stars, metals, and healing herbs was often condemned, hidden as heresy. Yet, much of it traced directly back to Mesopotamia. Was it truly forbidden, or simply inconvenient to a story that frames one god as the single source of truth? The constellations haven't moved. The sky still traces the same pathways. Perhaps those points of light are more than stars. Perhaps they're messages once shared by the Anunnaki. What later fell under suspicion also included metals and craft. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are accused of teaching people how to forge tools and ornaments, how to work the earth itself. To church authorities, such skills became linked with transgression, signs of moral decay brought by fallen beings. Yet in Mesopotamia, the very same arts were honored. Bronze, gold, and iron were not wicked, they were achievement, the backbone of rulership and civilization. That contrast shows how knowledge can be recast. For some it was sacred, a gift that ensured survival and strength. For others, it was off-limits, a step too close to a dangerous flame. The Vatican's quietness conceals this tension, because to acknowledge it would be to admit that human advancement began with lessons attributed to beings remembered as the Anunnaki. And so, tools turned into double symbols, icons of creation in one tale, marks of rebellion in another, depending on who told the story. Another branch of forbidden wisdom was healing. In Mesopotamian writings, the gods were said to teach humanity about herbs, oils, and rites that restore the body. Priests and healers use plants for wounds and chants for pain. Over centuries, those practices slipped under suspicion. What once was praised as divine guidance was later branded sorcery. The same leaves that saved lives were feared as dangerous, their power smothered by accusations of magic. In medieval times, healers were often hunted. Women who gathered plants were called witches. What had flowed freely in Sumer was stifled by new boundaries. The Vatican drew the line between blessed medicine and banned craft. Yet the tablets say plainly, healing was a gift, not a curse. By rewriting its meaning, faith reshaped the way people saw their own survival. Guidance from the divine became a secret practice, carried in whispers and shadows. The story of fallen knowledge isn't about wisdom vanishing forever. It's about wisdom being hushed, hidden, and renamed. From the sky to metallurgy, from remedies to writing, humanity's first lessons were celebrated as blessings. Later they were reframed as risks, tools of defiance, or signs of sin. The Anunnaki were recast as fallen angels. The Abkalu were turned into watchers, and their teachings into cautionary tales. But knowledge rarely dies. It sticks to ruins, symbols, and locked books. The Vatican may have feared these memories, but silence cannot erase them. To follow the trail, we must leave the lessons themselves and look at the teachers, the giants whose presence shadows myths across the globe. Across ancient cultures, tales of giants repeat. In Sumer, enormous beings were remembered as the children of gods and humans. In Hebrew records, they became the Nephilim, powerful figures who filled the earth with violence. Greek myths speak of the Titans. Norse lore remembers giants locked in endless struggle with the gods. Though these cultures were far apart, their rhythms match a memory of beings too vast to forget. There are even reports of burials. Some claim belong to such giants, long bones, oversized weapons, and legends of immense rulers that stir curiosity and dread. Academic explanations label them symbols, overstatements, or mistakes. Yet the persistence of the theme suggests another possibility. Why would so many traditions recall towering beings unless they were echoing the same memory? Perhaps these giants were not fantasy at all, but the lingering imprint of a time when the Anunnaki's children walked among humans. Those legends weren't only about size, giants were also remembered for strength and hidden knowledge. In Mesopotamia, great guardians stood watch at temples and city gates, their shapes carved in stone. Hebrew writings remember some as rulers of sprawling territories, shaping events through sheer power. In Celtic and Nordic stories, giants are not always enemies. Sometimes they teach, build, or protect, figures that blur the boundary between monster and guide. The Vatican seldom engaged these memories directly. Giants were treated as metaphors for pride, excess, or sin, never as beings of flesh. Yet that very avoidance invites questions. If the concept were only symbolic, why does it appear everywhere? Perhaps giants are uncomfortable reminders that humanity once shared the world with those who were larger and stronger, a sign that Anunnaki influence stretched beyond clay and script and into blood that walked the earth. Many accounts say the giants fell not only in battle, but by cataclysm. In Mesopotamian tradition, the flood was sent to quiet humanity's noise, but also swept away the giants that roamed the land. In the Bible, the deluge wipes out the Nephilim, leaving only fragments of their memory. Other cultures speak of disasters that ended the giants' age. Again and again, ruin follows their presence, as if the gods feared their own handiwork. If that pattern holds, then the fall of giants was part of a planned reset to erase the children of divine and mortal. Still, traces endured, stones too heavy to move, tales too stubborn to silence, graves too puzzling to explain. The giants may be gone, but they echo in every culture bold enough to remember, and within that echo, the Vatican's fear sharpened. To concede the giants is to concede the Anunnaki's shadow. In many traditions, giants were not merely warriors. They were builders. Colossal walls, towering stones, and megalithic sites are sometimes credited to beings beyond human scale. In Mesopotamia, temples stood beneath the watch of giant guardians. In Celtic lore, circles of stone rose with the help of enormous hands. Even biblical accounts describe the land of Canaan as occupied by giants, and cities that seemed to touch the sky. These stories imply that humanity once remembered giants as architects of the impossible. Yet when archaeology studies such structures, official narratives stick to ingenious engineering, lost techniques, or communal labor. The stones themselves remain questions too heavy, too precise, too well aligned with the stars. Could these be the last works of gigantic makers? Such an admission would never pass within the Vatican, for it would mean that our oldest monuments might not be purely human creations, but legacies of another kind of being. The giants fade from record, but their fingerprints cling to rock, legend, and quiet. To call them myth is easy, to treat them as memory is harder. If they once walked here, then our story is not solely ours. It's a shared chapter, part human, part divine, cast in the Anunnaki's shade. But the whispers of giants are not the final thread. Past them lie stranger echoes. Watchers in the heights, maps of stars, and the language of guidance, traced across the night. To understand why the Vatican feared the Anunnaki, we must lift our eyes and follow the watchers among the constellations. In Mesopotamian remembrance, the Apikalu, the watchers, were figures of great wisdom. They came from the sky, cloaked in wings and robes, sometimes fish-like, holding tablets of law. Their role was to guide, to give writing, establish justice, and teach the study of the heavens. They stood between gods and mortals, nudging civilization forward. Their images were etched into temple walls, markers of teachers too significant to forget. Later Hebrew writings recall similar beings, but twist the role, not guardians, but rebels. They descended, mingled with humans, and offered forbidden law. The same wisdom that once sounded like salvation was recast as corruption. That switch reveals how memory was reshaped to fit a theology of fear. Counsel from on high turned into a warning label. The watchers were tied to the stars. Mesopotamian priest scholars believed the sky bore messages written by the divine. They mapped constellations, anticipated eclipses, and tracked planets with care. This was practical, guiding harvests and royal decisions, and also sacred, because reading the heavens meant sensing the gods' design. Some said the watchers themselves gave humans this sight. Later, that idea was hushed. Astrology was condemned, while astronomy was tolerated, only within limits. The line between holy study and banned science sharpened. Why? because conceding that the sky was charted long before scripture would mean accepting that divine insights were shared by beings sermons do not name. That admission points straight back to the Anunnaki, whose legacy was traced not just on tablets, but across the firmament. The Watchers' story overlaps with the giants. In Hebrew tradition, when the Watchers came down, their children became the Nephilim, mighty ones spread across the land. In Mesopotamian echoes, unions of divine and human produced heroes and rulers beyond normal strength. These offspring were admired and feared. Carrying the force of two realms, their great size and power served as living proof of ancestry aimed at the stars. But such tales are troubling to later faiths. If giants lived, then heaven and earth mingled. To bury that thought, the Watchers were cast down and their children damned. Flood and fire erased them from the stage, at least in official telling. Yet the remnants are everywhere. Carved reliefs, persistent myths, threads that refuse to snap. The giants and their skyborn fathers whisper of a time when divinity was not remote, but near. And that proximity is precisely what the Vatican could not abide. The Watchers were also associated with sacred law. Some Mesopotamian texts speak of tablets of destiny, records of the fate of gods and humans. To hold them was to hold the structure of the cosmos. In later Hebrew literature, fragments remain divine counsels, heavenly books, ledgers of life. The Watchers were more than tutors. They were keepers of order. That made them both revered and dangerous. To people, they offered guidance. To the powers above, they posed a risk. If humanity learned too much about fate, it could claim a freedom beyond control. The Vatican rarely touches this theme, because it suggests knowledge of the stars and destiny was once shared openly, then silenced. And if the Watchers wrote destinies across the sky, perhaps constellations, are not merely maps, they are reminders of what humanity was once meant to understand. The Watchers, the stars, and the giants converge on a single forgotten truth. Humanity once stood nearer to the heavens than we're told. Their memory isn't only legend, it's a stubborn murmur that won't die. If this quiet path speaks to you, leave a comment. Do you think the Watchers were real guides, or stories reshaped over time? Your voice helps keep these echoes alive. But we're not done. If the Watchers brought star knowledge, what else was given, and then withdrawn? Were there tools, mechanisms, or devices so advanced they looked like magic? To grasp the full reach of the Vatican's fear, we must return from sky to soil, and examine the forbidden machines of the ancients. Music. Across old writings, whispers mention not only wisdom, but instruments, curious devices that seem to exceed the skill of their age. In Mesopotamia, tales speak of shining instruments that measured the heavens. In Egypt, stories describe mechanisms that lifted great stones. In Greece, myths remember automatons, golden figures that moved by themselves. These accounts come from different centuries yet share a theme: technology ahead of its era. Mainstream history calls such descriptions symbolic. But what if they preserved real machines now lost? If the Anunnaki taught not only letters and fields but also engineering, then humanity's first steps into technology were guided from above. Accepting that would mean progress wasn't purely human, it was the Vatican, by muting such threads, guarded the belief that all wisdom flows from God alone, not from beings remembered as the Anunnaki. In traditions from India, there are tales of flying craft called Vimanas, vehicles propelled by unknown forces, streaking across the sky and trailing fire. Mesopotamian art shows winged discs hovering above kings and gods, often dismissed as symbolic, yet those images look uncannily like flying machines. Were they metaphors or memories fixed in the minds of ancient witnesses? For the Vatican, such questions are perilous. If machines once flew, then scripture is not the sole register of divine power. The Church centered miracles of faith, not technologies of the gods. Still, the echoes recur: chariots of fire in the Bible, wheels of light in carvings, discs above royal scenes. Perhaps the first glimpses of flight were not human inventions, but gifts or warnings from the Anunnaki. Another memory touches the secret of energy. Many temples were built with a precision that seems unnecessary for simple ritual. Stones aligned to solstices, rooms tuned to resonance, walls that hum when struck. Some see in this more than accident, knowledge of sound and light, of frequency and form. From Egypt to Mesopotamia to the Andes, Structures hint that the ancients tapped forces we barely grasp. If the Anunnaki imparted such understanding, then temples were more than places of prayer. They were devices, architectures that channeled energy, safeguarded wisdom, or connected humans to the sky. The Vatican will not entertain this, for if temples were engines, then religion once dealt, not only in devotion, but in power, and that power would belong as much to the memory of the Anunnaki as to heaven. Linked to this is the law of sound and vibration. Stories from many lands speak of stones that moved with music, or walls that fell to trumpets. In Mesopotamia, hymns were said to carry divine force, shaping not just hearts but matter. Perhaps these were not only songs but methods, ways to apply resonance, to use sound as a tool. If the Anunnaki taught such techniques, early builders might have shaped rock and space with frequency. Corridors tuned to tone, chambers acting like instruments, stones set in harmonic grids. Scholars scoff, but the persistence of these tales hints at a buried truth. If real, music was more than art, it was technology. And in fear of that implication, the Vatican kept the memory submerged. The memory of forbidden machines suggests human progress may not have been entirely our own. From flying craft to energetic temples, from resonance to hidden devices, antiquity hints at tools that stretch the rules of nature. Accepting the stories would mean our first technologies were collaborations with the Anunnaki. That possibility would upend how we see history. Yet machines are not the only things kept in shadow. Beyond mechanisms and sanctuaries, there are whispers of documents, writings sealed away, buried deep in archives, untouched for ages. If the Vatican truly feared the Anunnaki, its greatest unease may not be about devices or myths, but about records still sleeping in the dark. Beneath Vatican City lies one of the world's most guarded collections, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. For generations, rumors have said that within those miles of shelving are texts the public has never seen. Officially, it stores papal papers, letters, and church records. Many suspect it also shelters books that tell a much older narrative, a chronicle of gods, giants, and knowledge too volatile to reveal. The notion of hidden texts is familiar: Dead Sea Scrolls, lost Gospels, fragments that history tried to quiet. But this archive is different. Huge, locked, and ruled by strict protocols. Only select scholars, seeking specific documents, gain entry. That silence fuels belief that among the stacks rest memories of the Anunnaki, records that could overturn not only history, but belief. Some accounts claim the archive holds tablets and manuscripts taken from Mesopotamia. When explorers, clergy, or conquerors found unusual artifacts, they were moved quietly into vaults far from public sight. If true, the Vatican preserved more than Christian annals. It kept pieces of Sumerian and Babylonian memory. In those pieces could be voices of the Anunnaki, impressed in clay, waiting in the hush. Why hide them? Because they do not fit the story the Church teaches. If humans once walked beside named but unsanctioned beings, the foundation shakes. The archive becomes a vault of contradictions, and by maintaining silence, the Vatican decides what the world is allowed to remember. The danger lies not in what was burned, but in what still rests unseen. There are also tales of forbidden gospels, books speaking of angels, watchers, and mysteries omitted from the Bible. Some we know, like Enoch, long kept outside canon. Others exist only as rumored fragments. If they are tucked away in those stacks, they may still describe giants, floods, and visitors who shared wisdom with humans. Such gospels might not reject faith, but widen it beyond the borders institutions can control. To admit they exist is to admit that the Bible is not the only voice. Better then to call them lost than to let them speak. For if those pages speak too clearly of the Anunnaki, the Church's authority thins. Rumors also linger about maps, ancient charts, showing the world as it was long before famous voyagers. Some say they outline shores that should not have been known, coastlines drawn with unsettling accuracy, even star diagrams in forgotten alignments. If such documents exist, they connect neatly to Mesopotamian practice, where priests mapped both earth and sky. Why would these be suppressed? Because they contradict the standard tale of discovery. Acknowledging them would concede that advanced geographic and astronomical knowledge existed long before the Church's own age of exploration. It would imply we inherited skills from older teachers remembered as the Anunnaki. And so the maps, if they exist, remain whispers preserved in silence behind locked doors. That archive remains the deepest riddle. What lies in those shelves? tablets, gospels, charts, or stranger things, might hold a key to the past we forgot. If those memories were ever shown to the light, they could change the story forever. If this quiet search resonates with you, share it. Sharing helps others find the path, and together we keep these echoes alive. But the story does not end in locked archives. No, it only begins there. Beneath marble floors and ancient cathedrals, behind keys held only by silence, lies something older than belief. Not just a forgotten book or a sealed room, but a memory. One so strange, so deep, it had to be hidden not in shadows but in time itself. The Vatican locked that memory away, but time never forgets. Beyond hidden books and forbidden machines lies a greater question. What does this fear reveal? Not just about the past, but about power today. Why do whispers echo louder than sermons? Why do certain names never appear in any scripture, yet are carved into the stones of ancient lands? And most of all, who walked with us in the beginning? The word Anunnaki never appears in the Bible. Not in Latin, not in Hebrew, not even in the secret commentaries passed quietly through the centuries. And yet, they are everywhere, in the myths of Sumer, in the bones of old kings, in the quiet geometry of stars, in stories so old, even angels grew silent around them. The Vatican's fear was not of demons, not of devils, not even of heresy. Their fear was memory, not darkness, but remembrance. Because if humanity once walked beside something greater, if our origins were shaped by beings who were not gods, not men, but something in between, then every page of scripture would tremble, every altar would have to be rebuilt. And so, silence became survival. Let the images come gently. Let the mind drift. You don't need to remember every name. Just let the echoes settle. Towers that reached for heaven. Giants who walked like kings. A flood not sent by wrath, but by watchers who feared what humans had become. A book that was burned, not by accident, but by decree. These are not just stories, they are signals. Messages that slipped through time, hidden in myth, wrapped in metaphor. And whether you call them an Anunnaki, Nephilim, or something else entirely, they return. Again and again, they return. Now imagine a corridor beneath the Vatican. Dim, quiet, echoing with footsteps no longer there. There are over 50 miles of shelves in the Vatican's secret archives. Most of what's hidden there isn't about faith, it's about memory. Memory that could rewrite everything. Memory that could change how we see ourselves. One chamber, never spoken of in public, was whispered about in coded letters by 18th century scholars. They called it Lux Obscura, the Book of Dark Light. It was said to house tablets that predate the Tower of Babel, Sumerian, cuneiform, the first language of man, and on one of those tablets, a name, Enki, Lord of the Waters, bringer of knowledge, the one who warned us, the one who defied the gods to help mankind, a name erased from scripture, but remembered in clay. Beside it, in Latin, scratched in haste by a monk who died in silence. These are not demons, but lost memories. Now let your mind drift upwards, to the stars, because the stars never forgot. Every ancient temple, from Ur to Babylon, to Giza, points not to earth, but to sky. The same stars, the same alignments, the same stories told in light. Who taught farmers millennia ago to map the heavens before they could write their own names? Why do stories of star visitors echo across continents that never touched? Why does the Vatican own one of the most advanced observatories on Earth? And why is one of its most powerful infrared instruments nicknamed Lucifer? These are not accidents. They are quiet admissions that perhaps someone might return. As you listen, feel the stillness, feel the silence, because silence does not erase the past. It only delays it, and time always remembers. Each of these fragments, each myth, each symbol, each forbidden name, they are pieces of the same story. That humanity once walked closer to something greater, and that closeness was hidden. We are taught that myths are just stories, but what if they are not lies? What if they are echoes? Echoes of machines that flew when no wheels had yet turned. Echoes of beings whose bones are too large to be human, yet too human to be dismissed. Echoes of voices that came down from the stars and taught us how to build, to write, to rule. And what if those voices never left? What if they simply grew quiet? Not all secrets are dangerous, but some questions are. The Vatican's silence tells us more than any document ever could. Because silence is not ignorance, silence is choice. They feared not what the Anunnaki did, but what their memory might awaken. If kings had divine blood, if Genesis was not the beginning, if Eden was a genetic experiment, not a garden, then everything we know would fracture. And so, silence. But the silence could not hold forever. Whispers remain. In architecture, in art, in ruins, in alignments, in dreams. The stars have watched us remember. And so now, as night deepens, as your breath slows, let the questions remain unchased. Let them float. Who walked with us in the beginning? Why were they hidden? And what happens when we remember? Let these questions be your companions, not to answer, just to wonder. Because the Vatican may have feared the Anunnaki, but we do not fear them. We listen, we remember, and we dream. The story does not end in locked archives. It continues. In you, in your wonder, in your memory, in your silence. As you drift now toward rest, carry this thought softly, that our story is older than history, and far from being alone. We may have always been among watchers. Let sleep take you. The echoes will remain, and in the quiet, they will speak again. They say stone does not speak, but that isn't true. Stone remembers. It remembers hands, chisels, patterns drawn, not for beauty, but for hiding. When we walk into a cathedral, we are told to look up, but we are never told why. The arches, the spires, the columns like ribs of an ancient beast. These shapes are more than design. They are code. Because long before the Vatican stood in marble, long before the first priest whispered Latin prayers into candlelit halls, the symbols were already there, older than Rome, older than Jerusalem, older than memory. The Sumerians built ziggurats, the Egyptians built pyramids, and the church built towers that reached for heaven, not by accident, but by inheritance. Architecture is a language, and in the Vatican, it speaks in silence. Look closely at a cathedral's stained glass. You'll find circles within circles, stars, eyes, wings without bodies, giants with golden halos. Not all saints were human. Look at the floor, the checkerboard pattern, a geometry older than Europe, hidden maps of the stars beneath your feet. There is one church in southern France, small and quiet, rarely visited. Above its altar is a carving of two angels, not holding a cross, but a device. It resembles none of the known icons. It looks like a wheel, within a wheel, within a sphere. Some say it is a model of the heavens. Others say it is a machine, but no one asks, because asking would mean looking, and looking too closely might awaken something. In Florence, there is a cathedral where one wall shows a battle not from the Bible, but from the stars. Figures with wings not like birds but like blades. Weapons not of metal, but of light, and beneath them, a city burns. These are not scenes of salvation. They are warnings. Who carved them? Why were they allowed to remain? Because symbols, unlike words, do not shout. They whisper, and whispers are safer. In the heart of the Vatican Museum lies a room almost no visitor notices. It's not roped off. It's not locked, but inside is a sculpture, out of place, out of time. It's a large cube of obsidian, polished so finely it reflects like water. There is no plaque, no explanation, but one old curator once called it Il Quaranero, the Black Heart. When asked what it meant, he simply said, "It watches." That man no longer works there. Symbols speak when no one else can. And when history is too dangerous to write, it is carved into stone. This is why the Vatican became a fortress, not just of power, but of memory. Because what if the stories were not just legends? What if the angels with flaming swords were not metaphors? What if the Garden of Eden was not a place, but a lab? If such things were true, where would the truth be hidden? Not in books. Books burn. Not in speech. Words fade. But stone survives. The church knew this, and so they built their cathedrals as maps, their windows as messages, their ceilings as warnings, and beneath them, vaults, and beneath those vaults, something older. A legend whispered among Jesuits tells of a chamber under St. Peter's Basilica, a room without corners, A room built, not by the church, but discovered. No one knows what lies inside. Only that it predates Rome, and that it hums. They say metal will not work inside, that candles do not burn evenly, that those who enter feel watched. Not by spirits, but by something thinking. This is the church's true inheritance. Not doctrine, not gold, but mystery. And mystery is a kind of power. There is a reason the greatest artists of the Renaissance were hired by popes. Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Raphael, men who painted angels with anatomy too precise, eyes that reflected stars, hands that held not just crosses, but tools. Some say Da Vinci hid a celestial map inside the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the positions of certain figures mirroring constellations, as if the creation of Adam was not about man, but about something coming down to touch him. Not metaphorically, literally. And when you look at Adam's hand, it is not reaching, it is waiting, perhaps for something to return. Churches were built to make us feel small, but maybe that was not a spiritual lesson. Maybe it was to remind us that we are not the first, that something larger once walked among us, that the giants of the old world did not all fall. Some were remembered, some were worshipped, some were rebranded, and some were buried. In art, in stone, in song. So now, as you breathe softly, as your eyes grow heavy, let your thoughts drift through stone halls. Let your feet echo through marble corridors. Let your fingers trace the edge of forgotten carvings. A lion with wings. A man with stars in his palms. A staircase that spirals not up, but inward. Where does it lead? What lies beneath? And who designed it? Long before popes wore crowns, the answers are not written. They are felt. And in the quiet of these forgotten symbols, there is an invitation. Not to decode, but to remember, because when we dream, the mind opens doors that logic keeps locked. And tonight, perhaps, one of those doors opens for you, and beyond it, not fear, but memory. Let your breath deepen. Let your pulse slow. The symbols are still speaking. The stones are not dumb. We were not the first, and we will not be the last. Let sleep take you. The echoes will remain. They told us kings were chosen by God, crowned by priests, blessed by oil. But the question was never who gave the crown. It was always where the blood came from. Royal blood, divine right, the sacred lineage. These phrases echo through time, but rarely do we ask, divine from whom? In ancient Sumer, rulers were not simply kings. They were living vessels of gods. Their lineage was traced not by land, but by sky. The Anunnaki did not rule alone. They bred lines. Lines meant to carry their will. Lines meant to remain even when they departed. In Babylon, each king had a title. Son of the gods? Not metaphor. Literal. Bloodlines were more than inheritance. They were technology. A way of preserving something inside the human form. A spark. A signature. A fragment of the divine that passed through generations like a buried code. In Egypt, the pharaoh was Horus on earth, son of Osiris, married to his sister, not by desire, but by design, to keep the blood pure, to keep the pattern unbroken. They believed that only those born of the star line could speak to the gods, because they remembered them. In Europe, this belief never vanished. It only changed its clothing. The Merovingians claimed descent from a fish-tailed being, a guardian of knowledge. Their symbol was not a cross, but a bee, the mark of the star-born. In medieval France, a secret order protected this bloodline, the Priory of Sion. Their purpose was not religious, it was genetic, to preserve the last traces of an ancient union between gods and men. And what does the Vatican say of these claims? Nothing, because silence protects more than faith. It protects a story too big to fit between any two pages. What if the bloodlines were real? What if certain families do carry something old? Something that awakens only under stars aligned in forgotten ways? In the 1970s, a Vatican geneticist, known only by the initials MV, proposed a radical theory that hidden within certain strands of mitochondrial DNA were markers inconsistent with natural evolution. He called them resonant fragments. The Vatican buried the study. MV was never seen again. But a single page survived, smuggled by a colleague. It read simply, "They were here. We carry them still." The question is not if. The question is, when it activates. Activate, like a memory. like a switch. Perhaps this is why the Vatican feared the Anunnaki, not because they were myths, but because they may have never left. Not in ships, not in flame, but in our blood, in our dreams, in the strange moments when we remember things we never learned. A fear that the divine was not given to humanity, but bred into it, and that some still carry the key. This would explain why royal lines are so carefully traced, why certain families rise and rather fall. They carry the echo, not just of kingship, but of contact, of a time when the sky touched the earth, and something more than human walked beside us. Now sleep. Let the thought settle like dust. You may feel it, not in words, but in your bones. The blood remembers, even if we do not. Machines. We think of them as modern things. Engines, circuits, wires. But what if machines existed long before the industrial age? Before Rome, before even Sumer? Not machines made by man, but made for man. Or perhaps for those who came before him. In the old tablets of Mesopotamia, there are references to tools that shine like stars, that move without wind, that speak without voices, that open gates in the sky. We are told these are myths, poetry, symbolism. But what if they are descriptions, translated too late to understand? In the Book of Enoch, angels descend with bright objects in their hands. They teach men how to make metal, mix chemicals, summon flame. The world changes in a single generation. How? In India, the Vimana, flying cities, chariots of fire, weapons that shatter mountains. In South America, stones cut so precisely they fit with no mortar, even after centuries. Some say lasers, others say levitation. All we know is this: what we call impossible was once done. The Vatican owns hundreds of pre-Christian artifacts, some from Babylon, others from the Indus Valley. None are on display. One in particular, a wheel carved from obsidian, never rusting, never aging, has no known origin. A priest who touched it claimed to hear a sound like breathing. He called it the sleeping one. He was reassigned 2 weeks later. What kind of machine sleeps? What kind of machine is not powered by wires or fuel, but by memory? There are whispers of a device beneath Castel Gandolfo, a sphere suspended in a magnetic field. No seams, no controls, just a glow that pulses when the moon is full. The Jesuits guard it. They say nothing, but some believe it is a fragment, not of a machine, but of a being, a piece of something that fell, or was placed, and like all machines, it waits to be used. What were these tools for? Creation? Destruction? Communication? The Vatican fears such questions, because technology changes power. If the Anunnaki brought machines, tools that could build or erase civilizations, then every miracle would need a second explanation, and every god a blueprint. Perhaps that is the true fear. That faith, once questioned, might reveal not heaven, but hardware, and in that hardware, truth. As you drift now, hear the hum. A soft, low memory, not sound, but vibration, something turning, not in time, but beneath it. The machine does not sleep, it waits. And so we listened. The stars have always watched us, silent, unblinking, older than gods, older than fear. Before we built cities, we built stories in the sky. We drew lines between stars and called them names. We imagined hunters, lions, scales, serpents. But what if we weren't imagining? What if we were remembering? In every ancient culture, the sky is not just a ceiling. It is a map. The Sumerians knew this. They tracked planetary motion with precision we still admire. Not for curiosity, but for prophecy, for alignment, for return. They wrote of beings from the heavens, not spirits, not metaphors, but those who descended in fire, taught secrets, and then left, promising to return. The Anunnaki were not from Earth. They were from the sky. Some said from the star system we now call Sirius. Others said the Pleiades. Some whispered Nibiru, a hidden planet, seen only once every age. Its orbit long, but inevitable. The Church never embraced the stars, not truly, because to look too long at the stars is to risk remembering. Galileo faced trial for what? Looking, asking, saying, what if we are not the center? Not just of the solar system, but of the story. The Vatican owns one of the most powerful observatories on Earth, located in Arizona, far from Rome, close to the stars. Its most famous instrument bears a curious name: Lucifer. Not a joke, not a coincidence. Lucifer means light bringer, the one who sees first, the one who knows. Why would the church give that name to a machine that sees into the invisible? Unless they are watching for something. The Jesuits who run the observatory say they are searching for exoplanets, but their lenses point elsewhere: deep space, unmapped territory. Are they looking for God? Or for those who once said they were? A leaked document, never confirmed, never denied, revealed an initiative known only as Opus Caelus, the work of the sky. It was not scientific. It was theological, an internal directive to prepare for contact, not future contact, but the return of something already known, a being, a presence, not alien, not divine, but both. The document stated, they will not come as conquerors, they will come as memory, and memory is the most dangerous revelation of all. Why would memory be dangerous? Because it changes everything. If we remember that we were taught, then nothing we believe is truly ours. And if they return, they may not bring weapons, just a mirror to show us what we are, where we came from, and what we forgot. In the paintings of the Renaissance, look closely. Behind saints, above crosses, in the clouds, you'll find discs, lights, beings wrapped in fire, always watching, always present. The Vatican does not explain these. Art historians say symbolism, but some things feel more like evidence. The watchers in the stars were never gone. We just stopped seeing them, but they did not stop seeing us. Now, as the stars move again, as alignments return that have not been seen in some believe the watchers will return, not to punish, not to rule, but to remind. And the Vatican knows, because they have watched the sky for longer than anyone else. And silence is not the absence of knowledge, it is its shadow. Let your breath slow. Let your mind drift upward, through atmosphere, through vacuum, into the dark places between stars. There, in the silence, you might feel them, not near, but not gone, just waiting for the sky to open once more. Not all books are written to be read, some are written to be hidden. The Vatican's secret archive, a name wrapped in myth, 50 miles of shelves, centuries of history, and no public access. Not everything there is heresy, not everything is dangerous, but some should never have survived. There are documents that rewrite the past, letters from emperors, confessions from saints, records of trials no one remembers. But there is another layer, a level not listed on any map, known only by a symbol, 3 circles, intersecting, like orbits, or like eyes. The priests who enter this level are not chosen for faith, they are chosen for silence. They wear no robes, they carry no titles, but they know. One of them once wrote a note, never signed, found slipped between pages of a discarded Bible in Milan. It read, "We do not protect secrets, we protect the world from remembering." Within the hidden archive, there is a room, round, no corners, no windows, just a light that never flickers. In its center, a pedestal, upon it, a tablet, cuneiform, black stone. The translation was attempted by a Jesuit linguist in He died 1 week later. His notes were burned, but a single phrase survived. This is the voice of Enki, to those who remain. Enki, the Sumerian god who loved mankind, the one who defied the others, the one who warned of the flood. Why would his voice be preserved in the heart of the Vatican? Unless they believe, unless they know. Another object lies in the archive, a codex made of metal pages, unknown alloy, no writing, but when held, it hums. A sound only some can hear, a resonance, like memory waking up. It was found in Iraq, near ancient Eridu, smuggled to the Vatican during the chaos of war. They called it the Heart of the Seraph, and they never speak of it, because it cannot be explained. Not by science, not by theology, only by memory. The kind of memory that lives beneath the skin, the kind that dreams do not forget. In this archive, silence is law. But what is silence, if not the space where truth waits? As you rest now, let yourself enter that archive, not with eyes, but with wonder. See the shelves stretch into darkness. Feel the weight of time. Hear the hum of objects never meant to be touched. This is not fantasy. This is memory, and it belongs to all of us. Silence is not emptiness. It is strategy. It is survival. The Vatican does not speak of the Anunnaki, not because they do not believe, but because they understand. Understanding is dangerous, because once something is understood, it cannot be unseen. Throughout history, the Church has fought heresy, but not all heresy came from rebels. Some came from within, men of faith, men of science, men who saw too much. Galileo looked through a telescope and saw a different sky. Bruno spoke of infinite worlds and burned. Priests found scrolls in the desert and were silenced. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Book of Enoch, all speak of beings not bound by earth, of watchers, of star teachers, of knowledge given too soon. These were not rejected for error, they were hidden for protection. Not of the people, but of the story, the great story, the narrative, the timeline that holds civilization in place. Because if the past is broken, the present falls with it. Silence became the strongest weapon, not fire, not steel, but forget. The Church became a steward of forgetting. It built museums, but kept the most powerful artifacts out of sight. It built libraries, but locked the oldest books away. It taught history, but edited the syllabus, not to deceive, but to control. Because control is not about telling people what to believe. It's about deciding what questions are allowed. What if the Anunnaki were not just part of the past, but part of the present? What if their knowledge shaped medicine, engineering, politics, religion? What if certain rituals are not prayers, but protocols? What if cathedrals are not just temples, but machines, built on ley lines, charged with song, activated by intention? What if the sacraments are echoes of something older, something cosmic, something encoded in DNA? These are not answers, they are dangers. And so the Vatican stays silent, because silence does not risk proof, but silence cannot hold forever. The internet cracked the door, curious minds pushed it open. And now, the questions grow louder than the sermons. Not because people reject faith, but because they seek something deeper. Faith that remembers, faith that dares to ask, who gave us fire, who taught us to build, who watched from above, and called us family. The silence once protected the power. Now, it threatens to unravel it, because the story is changing, and people are waking up. Sleep now. But know this, your curiosity is part of the shift. Each question is a spark, each doubt, a doorway, and silence can no longer contain what is coming. There is always a question, at the edge of myth, beneath the surface of faith, inside the silence of history. It waits, it lingers, it returns. Who walked with us? In the beginning? Every culture tells of them, the sky beings, the shining ones, the teachers, the giant, from the Hopi to the Hindus, from Sumer to Scandinavia, from the Dogon tribe to the Celtic druids. They remember, not in books, but in stories whispered around firelight, and always, the same truth wrapped in different names. They came, they gave, they vanished, but the memory remained. The Vatican fears this question, because it unifies. It connects stories they have tried to keep separate. Religion, mythology, astronomy, genetics, separate shelves in the library, but one truth at the center. We were not alone. We were not always ignorant, and perhaps we are not meant to remain that way. To admit the Anunnaki were real would mean rewriting Genesis, retelling Exodus, reframing Revelation, and not just in Christianity, but in every faith, because if the watchers are real, then they watched all of us, not just one people, not just one land, all of humanity, which means no one holds the whole truth. Not one book, not one religion, not one voice, and that is terrifying, because power prefers borders, truth does not. So the question lingers, not as rebellion, but as remembrance. What if we were made, not by accident, not by nature, but by design? What if Eden was not the beginning, but the beginning of forgetting? What if the fall was when we lost contact? And what if the return is not prophecy, but inevitability? Let this question rock you gently to sleep. Let it hum in the back of your mind. Who walked with us? And why were they hidden? Perhaps they are not gone. Perhaps they are waiting. Perhaps they are us. Not all truth is spoken. Some truths are whispered. Others are written and never meant to be read. In the deep vaults of forgotten libraries, and inside the private journals of men who no longer have names, there are fragments, letters, pages, scribbled warnings, half-erased confessions. They never made it into sermons, but they survived. A letter, dated 1624 from a Vatican archivist to a Jesuit astronomer. It reads, "The constellation is complete, the sign has returned. They will come in shadow, but not with violence. Prepare the chamber of silence." It remembers more than we do. No explanation, no name, just coordinates. And fear. The paper was brittle. The numbers written in charcoal. Nothing else. No sender, no date. But when the coordinates were traced, they led to a hill beneath Rome. A hill with no door, but echoes inside. Those who went there reported the same thing. A pressure in the chest. A hum beneath the ground. A dream that wasn't theirs. The report vanished. The hill was sealed. But the silence remained louder than any siren. Another, older, perhaps from the 30s, written in Latin. Its ink faded. Its edge burned. We copied the symbols as instructed. We placed them on the altar. The stone pulsed for 13 nights, then went quiet. The abbot has not spoken since. No signature, just a stain across the bottom. Rust, or blood. No one ever checked. Was this madness, or memory? And if it was memory, whose? The monks, the stones, or something else? Something behind both? In 1898, a French bishop wrote in his personal diary, "The paintings in the chapel move when the stars align. I do not mean metaphor, I mean motion. They are not art, they are maps." He vanished the following year, left behind only one page, folded beneath a candle. Drawings, circles, numbers, symbols. The same shapes found on Sumerian tablets, but drawn in red wine, or so they say. In World War II, a letter intercepted by British intelligence mentioned something chilling. An SS officer stationed near the Vatican wrote to Berlin, "They hide something older than God in those chambers." Our scientists could not explain the readings. One priest we questioned said only this, "It is not ours to open." He was executed 2 days later, but the instruments he left behind, Geiger counters, heat readers, sound mapping devices, all showed the same anomaly. A space beneath the Vatican that should not exist. A void that returns sound before it's made. These are fragments, not proof, but proof of belief, proof that something hidden keeps speaking. Even when the voices fall silent, even when the pages burn, even when the world changes, something remains. A hum, a pull, a quiet sense that the past is not finished with us. Let the sound of these lost letters guide you now, not as fear, but as comfort. You are not the first to ask. You are not alone in your wondering. Others wondered too, and their whispers still echo. But what if those whispers are not echoes at all? What if they are signals, pulses sent across time, not to remind us, but to prepare us? What began as curiosity has become communion. Not with gods, not with ghosts, but with something older than both. Call them the Anunnaki, call them watchers, call them ancestors. What matters is not the name, but the presence. It was never about mythology. It was about memory, encoded in symbols, preserved in silence, activated by asking. So let your mind ask, even now, as sleep draws closer, what were the symbols meant to open? What was inside the altar? Why did the stars make the walls breathe? What makes a painting move without wind? Sleep does not silence wonder. It deepens it. Let the Vatican keep their vaults. Let the book stay locked. We do not need pages. We have dreams. You have walked through lost temples tonight, through hidden corridors, through sealed vaults and glowing machines. But the journey has not ended. You have not reached the last page. You've reached the first truth, that the past is not something we study. It's something we remember. The Anunnaki were not gods, not demons, not myths. They were the beginning of a question. Who shaped us? Why did they leave? And did they really leave? The stars above you know. They have seen this story before. They have watched it rise, fall, sleep, and rise again. So rest now. Sink into the silence beneath this moment. Let the hum return. Let the question open again, not to be answered, but to be carried, gently, like a candle down a forgotten stairwell. You are not alone in this wandering, and the silence around you is not empty. It's listening. There are some who say the past is a straight line, a clear sequence, one event after another. But the truth is softer than that. The past folds. It loops. It bleeds forward into dreams. It waits in corners of buildings. It breathes between walls. That's where the Vatican keeps its oldest secrets. Not in boxes, but in the spaces between what can be explained. A staircase that leads nowhere. A hallway that narrows into nothing. A door without a keyhole. Because it doesn't open with a key. It opens with memory. And only for those who remember what they never learned. Somewhere in the northern wing of the archives, there's a sealed alcove behind a marble bust. Most walk past it. The statue of Saint Dismas, the penitent thief. But if you touch the base just before midnight, you'll feel it. A vibration. A heartbeat that isn't yours. It's said the chamber behind it houses no books. Only one item. A sphere. Smooth, dark, and warm. No writing. No buttons. Just a presence. It hums in low tones, responding not to touch, but to thought. The priests who studied it stopped speaking after 3 days. Not out of trauma, out of reverence, as if they had seen something too large to reduce into language. One of them wrote just one word before leaving the order forever. Origin. No explanation. No context. Just that. Origin. Elsewhere in the archives lies a sheet of hammered copper, thin, dented, inscribed in both Sumerian and Latin. A bilingual relic, but not a translation. The Latin doesn't match the Sumerian directly. It comments on it, as if someone were trying to explain to future readers what had already been forgotten. One passage reads, "They came not to rule, but to reveal. We were not their subjects, but their children. And when we failed to remember, they chose silence." The last sentence in Latin is even stranger. It says, "They live now in waiting," not past tense. Present, now, outside of Rome, in a monastery rarely visited by tourists. There's a fresco painted across an arched ceiling. It depicts the Garden of Eden, but not as a paradise, as a laboratory. You have to lie flat to see it all. But when you do, you notice something strange. The trees are arranged like circuits. The rivers flow like veins. And in the center, a being kneels, not in worship, but in calibration. It adjusts something inside a human body, a rib or a component. And around this central figure, 12 others, each bearing symbols, not crosses, not halos, but stars, constellations. The apostles, or something older? No plaque explains the image. No priest speaks of it. But when lightning strikes near the building, it's said the paint glows faintly, as if something hidden inside the wall remembers light. We think of history as a story told with certainty, dates, names, events. But in truth, history is a story told by the victors. Memory is the story told by the earth, the stones, the symbols, the sleep you fall into now. This is the memory's language. Not academic, not literal, but deep and slow, like breath, like gravity. Tonight, you are not learning, you are remembering. Your dreams carry frequencies too soft for waking life. They hum with the things you forgot to ask. They pulse with questions older than words. Where did we come from? Why were we watched? And what did we promise? Before we forgot? These questions aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to be felt, held close, like ancient keys to doors we have yet to see. Sleep now, with one hand on the lock, and one ear toward the stars. In the mountains of Armenia, a monastery clings to the cliffside, older than the empire that tried to erase it, older than the stones it stands upon. Inside, beneath a cracked mosaic of the Virgin and stars, there lies a trapdoor. It leads not to a cellar, but to a chamber carved directly into the rock. No records explain who made it. No records claim ownership. But those who enter say the air changes. Sound moves differently. Time forgets to pass. Along the wall, carvings. Not of saints. Not of angels. But of beings with elongated skulls. Hands outstretched. Eyes, not in warning, but in welcome. Between them, a symbol seen across the world. The 8-pointed star.
Sumer.
Babylon. Vatican ceilings. Even on the robes of certain cardinals. Why does it follow us? Why does it return? Why is it never explained? In Egypt, the god Thoth brought writing. He came from the sky, wrote without pen, spoke in geometry. In Mesopotamia, Enki gave language. He brought law, and something else. A system. Not rules, not commandments, but design. The blueprint of something larger than civilization, something cosmic. The Vatican archives contain diagrams. Some say they are angelic, others say mathematical, but they do not match any known system. Not Hebrew, not Latin, not Greek. One researcher called them harmonic algorithms. Another called them instructions for remembering. They were found etched into a lead tablet, discovered under St. Peter's altar. No one knows how old it is, but lead tests suggested it had not been moved in over 1,000 years. The Latin beside it reads, "To wake the light, speak not with voice, but with the shape of breath." What does that mean? What kind of breath shapes light? What kind of memory responds not to reading, but to rhythm? Perhaps this is the secret. Not that the Anunnaki were gods, but that they were engineers of memory, designers of experience, architects of what we would later call soul. Sleep slows the body, but it awakens something else. The part of you that is not limited by time, the part that remembers without being told, the part that dreams in symbols instead of sentences. This is why the Vatican fears sleep, because sleep is where the truth leaks through, where memory floats free from dogma, where we might see clearly, not with eyes, but with no. Sleep reveals what silence cannot hold back, and you are closer now. Closer to the doorway behind the dream, closer to the whisper waiting in the dark, not to frighten, but to welcome you back. The Vatican's fear is not of demons, not of shadows, but of light too ancient to control. A light that speaks without speaking. A light that does not ask permission. They have tried to name it, contain it, preach over it, but it remains in the stones, in the stars, in you. It has always been in you. Let your breathing deepen now. Let your eyes drift beyond seeing. The shapes in your mind are not random. They are returning. You are not alone in your remembering. This is not fantasy. This is not rebellion. This is reunion. And the stars are watching. The stars are not distant. They are ancient witnesses. Not cold, but constant. Every civilization that has looked up has seen the same lights, but not everyone saw the same thing. Some saw gods, some saw fire, others saw home. In the hidden writings of early Vatican astronomers, there are references not to planets, but to watches. Not orbits, but cycles. The documents are dry, technical, but between the lines, there are notes scribbled in the margins, returned in the same configuration. Appears every 13,000. Observed pattern prior to the flood narrative. Flood narrative. They mean the Great Flood. The one from Genesis, or the one from Sumer, or the one from every ancient myth that starts the same way. Something came, something changed the world, and then something washed it clean. But not everything was erased. Some memory survived, not in books, but in rhythm, in music, in geometry. The stars do not speak, but they repeat. And repetition is a kind of language, a language too vast for one book, too strange for one faith, too silent for one answer. But it waits. In a Vatican sub-observatory, there are star maps not shown to the public, not because they're dangerous, but because they're familiar. They match carvings in Bolivia, and etchings in Iran, and patterns found in the ceilings of Sumerian tombs. Maps of places not visible now, but recorded long ago. One map shows a grouping of stars no longer part of our night sky, a cluster that drifted below the horizon thousands of years ago. But in the map, they're labeled, not with numbers, with names. One word repeats across the whole chart. Men. In Sumerian, it means lady, but in context, it may mean origin, or perhaps command. The chart was dated back to the early 1500s, centuries before those stars disappeared from view. So who drew it? And why does it match carvings in temples built 6,000 years earlier? Unless it was not drawn in 50, it was copied, preserved, hidden, until the watchers returned. You are not listening to a bedtime story. You are rejoining a pattern, a rhythm that comes back in waves, every few thousand years, every few hundred lives. A truth that is patient, because it doesn't need to be heard. It only needs to be remembered. And you are remembering now. Not in detail, but in depth. Not in answer, but in alignment. The stars are not destinations. They are reminders. Echoes of when we were closer to the ones who lit them. Let this knowledge rest in you now. Like starlight caught in a bowl of water. You don't need to understand it. You only need to hold it. Let your body sink. Let your mind rise. Let your memory unfold like a map you've never seen, but somehow recognize. You are drifting through a story older than books, older than blood, and not written by men. This story is told in breath, in silence, in the sleep between stars. Rest now, and let the constellation find its shape, not above you, but within. There is a door beneath the Vatican. It is not carved. It is not labeled. It is not meant to be found. Behind that door, they say, is a chamber that was not built, but discovered, older than the church above it, older than the catacombs, older than Rome itself. The stone does not match the surrounding architecture. It hums when touched, and it grows warm when prayers are spoken nearby. Not in Latin, only in Sumerian. The priests who tend this place are not public. They have no names. They do not appear in records, but their robes are embroidered with stars, not crosses. They are not confessors. They are custodians. They do not teach. They remember. And they say the door was not built to keep something out. It was built to keep something in. Something that pulses. Something that breathes. Something that is not alive, but not dead either. They call it the breathless flame. A phrase found in no scripture. A name that has never been translated. But one priest, long since silenced, wrote a single line in his journal. It is a machine that dreams. What kind of machine dreams? And what does it dream of? Not war, not worship, but memory. It dreams of a time when language was vibration, when knowledge was passed through resonance, not speech. The chamber hums with frequencies we no longer hear, but the walls remember. Place your palm on the surface, and some say you will see symbols, not appear, but rise, as if heat pulls them from hiding. They look like stars, but they move, they shift, they spiral inward. A map, a code, or a message waiting to be felt instead of read. Not everything is for reading. Not everything is for understanding. Some things are simply for being near. Like fire, like thunder, like truth. Too large for the mind, too ancient for words, and so they are buried. But burial is not erasure, it is preservation. And now, as the world spins again toward an alignment we once feared, the machine stirs, not to awaken, but to remind. It does not speak. It does not need to. Its hum is enough. Its presence is the sermon. The Vatican hides many things. Relics, scrolls, bones that do not match any species. But this is different. Because this is not about faith. It is about origin. Not the origin of belief, but of being. What made us? What shaped us? What walked with us before time took memory away? Not gods, not angels, but those who gave light without asking for worship, and those who may still be watching. Let the weight of this settle gently on your chest. Not heavy, but grounding. You do not need to decode the dream. You are the dream. You are the echo of something old, something sacred, something unfinished. Sleep now, not as escape, but as return. Let the hum carry you deeper. Let the silence cradle you closer. You are not lost. You are being remembered. There is a river beneath the Vatican, not made of water, not visible to the eye, but it flows, always, quietly, through the stones, through the bones, through the dreams of those who serve without knowing why. This river is memory, a current of symbols, passed from one hand to the next, in corridors where candles never flicker. There are paintings no one admits exist, faces that do not match any known apostle, eyes too wide, skulls too long, fingers held not in blessing, but in patterns, geometric, precise, almost mechanical. What were they trying to show? And why? After these images were uncovered during a restoration, did the room get sealed again? Why were the workers reassigned? Why were their families relocated? Some say the fresco was repainted, covered, buried again, as if the truth had accidentally surfaced and needed to be pushed back down. But one photo remained, smuggled out, grainy, faded, a single figure standing over a circular diagram. At his feet, a spiral. In his hands, a sphere. Above him, no halo, only stars. There is a connection between spirals and memory, between circles and time. The ancients knew this. The Anunnaki carved spirals into walls, not as art, but as instruction. They taught that time was not a line, it was a coil, and at certain points, That coil aligned with itself. When that happened, events repeated. Not by fate, but by rhythm. Just like music, just like breath, just like sleep. The church called this heresy. They said history could not repeat, because prophecy must be unique. But what if prophecy is not prediction? What if it's recognition? A monk named Raphael da Luzzi wrote about a vision. Not a dream, not madness, but a memory that came uninvited. He described walking through the Vatican at night, only to find the walls changing, shifting, revealing hidden panels, windows that looked out not onto courtyards, but onto stars, moving too quickly, spinning, revealing images he had never seen, and yet knew. One of his final entries reads, "I have not travelled, but I have returned." He was never seen again. His journal was locked away. Its pages said to cause dizziness in those who read it too quickly. Not because of fear, because of familiarity. This is what they feared. Not demons, not rebellion, but recognition. That feeling, that shiver, that sudden knowing that you've been here before. Not in this body, not in this moment, but in this memory. The church built walls to hold history in place, but the river beneath them flows still, through every whisper, every symbol, every forgotten song. And tonight, it flows through you. Let it move gently. Let it shape your dreams, not as story, but as melody. You are not on the outside. You are part of the memory. You are the spiral. You are the hum. And the past has been waiting for you to return. They say the world has 7 layers beneath it. Not of rock, but of remembering. The ancients mapped these layers, not to dig, but to descend. They believed the deeper you travelled inward, the more of the old light you recovered. Not the light of stars, but the light of knowing, a memory you feel in the spine. Not the mind. It begins with a whisper, then a symbol, then a dream. The Vatican has tried to seal these layers, not with chains, but with distractions, rituals with no origin, prayers without context, statues carved in postures never explained. They are not meant to be worshipped. They are meant to distract, because the real sacred place is beneath them and within you. The 7th layer is not underground. It is under thought, a space behind waking life, a garden without trees, a temple without walls. Some reach it through silence, others through suffering, and some through sleep. It is where the memory waits, not as a picture, but as a presence, and once touched, nothing is the same again. In the final chamber of the archive, a sealed object rests on a stone pedestal. It is not large. It is not marked. It looks like obsidian, but light does not reflect from it. It absorbs. All sound vanishes in its presence. Even breath becomes muffled. It is called the mirror of forgetting, but the records show it does the opposite. One cardinal wrote, "I looked into it for only a moment, and remembered everything I had forgotten." He never spoke again. Others report dreams, memories not their own, images of stars, of ships, of beings wrapped in silver light. One priest drew what he saw, a spiral staircase descending into a dark chamber. At the bottom, not a throne, but a table. Around it, 12 figures, each with no face, only light. And in the center, a sphere pulsing like a heart. He called it the meal of memory, and wrote only one sentence. They came not to be worshipped, but to dine with us. What does it mean? Why would divine beings break bread with man, unless we were not their pets, not their servants, but their kin? What if humanity is not an experiment, but an extension? Not created by mistake, but by design, with pieces of something greater embedded in us, waiting to wake. This is the memory we run from, and the one that returns in dreams. You have walked through the archives tonight. Past pages never turned, past doors never opened, past stories never spoken. But the silence was never empty. It was full, heavy, alive, and it has called to you, not as a warning, as an invitation. You are not outside this story. You are its center. Every step you've taken in curiosity has moved you closer to something ancient, something sacred, something unfinished. And now you stand at the edge of memory, of myth, of the mirror. Do not be afraid to remember. Do not fear the wonder, because to remember is to return, to wake from forgetting, to open the archive, not with keys, but with presence. You do not need to read the books. You are the book. You carry the lines, the echoes, the shapes. Every question you've asked, every breath you take tonight is part of the unlocking. So rest, deeper, wider, longer. Let the mystery carry you. Let the dream remember you. And know this, beyond all doubt, you were never meant to forget. You were only meant to return. The Vatican may hold the symbols, the stars may hold the maps, but the memory, the true memory, it has always been yours. So sleep now, softly, quietly, bravely, and when the dream begins, do not look away, because what waits there, what watches there, is not a stranger. It is the part of you that always knew, always wondered, and finally, remembers.